In America, 90% of the nation would claim to be religious. And you define this in a way that's unambiguous. You don't say, well, do you go to church every Sunday? You don't ask that question. Plenty of people go to church who are not religious. They go to get a date or so. They go for the cupcakes or something. They don't go to be spiritually enlightened. So you ask a different question. You say, is there a God that listens to your prayers? If you answer yes to that, you're religious by anybody's definition, because your understanding of a deity is that that deity is monitoring your daily affairs. So that's unambiguous. This number's dropped in the last couple of years, but it's about 90%. Turns out if you go to college and get an advanced degree, a master's or a doctorate, where these are degrees where you actually question the state of existing knowledge. The undergraduate degree doesn't really do that. You're learning from textbooks that are written by somebody else. Your doctrines are already there. The higher degrees imply that you are questioning the very fabric of the knowledge you had previously learned. Among that community, it's 60%. It has dropped. Well, that's interesting. Let's keep going. How about scientists of all stripes? So a biologist, chemist.
Tyson begins by establishing a baseline. In the general American public, religious belief is incredibly high, hovering around 90%. He defines this not by church attendance, which can be social, but by the belief in a personal God who listens to prayers. This is a crucial distinction. We aren't talking about a vague energy in the universe. We are talking about a specific entity that intervenes in your daily life. But watch what happens when you introduce education. Tyson points out that once you move to people with advanced degrees, masters and PhDs, that number drops from 90% to 60%. Why? Because a graduate degree is fundamentally different from an undergraduate one. In an undergraduate program, you are largely consuming knowledge that has already been discovered. You are reading textbooks. But a graduate degree trains you to question the state of knowledge. It teaches you that, because the book says so, is not a valid argument. This is the first crack in the foundation of faith. Religion relies heavily on argument from authority. The Bible says, the Pope says, the Imam says. Science relies on, show me the evidence. As soon as you train a brain to demand evidence, the religious hold begins to slip.
Sorry, let's include engineers as well, people who have formal scientific training, mathematicians as well. Okay, what happens next? Drops to 40%. Now, if you look at this number, it looks like, wow, so scientists, the public is 90%, scientists are 40%. No, the drop is not that significant, because every scientist has an advanced degree. So in fact, the drop is not from 90 to 40, the drop is from 60 to 40. So becoming a scientist is not as big an effect on whether you're religious as you might otherwise think. Most of the drop comes because you're educated beyond the level of college. So that's 40%. So now you go to elite science.
It gets deeper. Tyson isolates scientists, biologists, chemists, physicists, engineers. The number of believers drops further, down to 40%. Now, Tyson makes a nuanced point here. The drop isn't actually as steep as it looks if you compare it to the educated group, 60% to 40%. This implies that simply being a scientist doesn't automatically make you an atheist. Being educated is the primary driver. However, the real smoking gun is when we look at the elite.
Scientists, members of the National Academy, highly accomplished subset among scientists, the number drops to 7%. There was a headline in Nature, the British journal Nature, which said, after this study was released, 93% of elite scientists reject God. So that was supposed to be a shocking headline. And I look at that and I said, that's not even interesting. That was the trend line anyway. What's more interesting, which was not the headline, is that 7% of elite scientists pray to a God. Isn't that a more interesting fact to you? Isn't that kind of interesting? The most accomplished scientists in the world, in that community, 7% of them still pray to a personal God. I think that is deserving of more study than the 93% who don't. Because something's going on there. We don't know what. And I have confronted people on this. I would say, to the most sort of vociferous in the atheist community, I would say, you're beating the public over the head, telling them, why are you doing that? And I'm thinking, before you beat the public, why don't you beat them over the head, okay? No, I'm just saying, if you're gonna rank, if you just, because you understand that first, because if you can't convert that 7%, you've got no hope in the general public. That's all I'm saying. This is among the ranks of the scientifically educated. Now, philosophers basically invented atheism. And if you do this, if you check the statistic for philosophers,
When you survey the members of the National Academy of Sciences, the absolute top tier, the most accomplished, brilliant minds in the country, belief in a personal God plummets to 7%. Think about that. In the general public, 9 out of 10 people believe. Among the intellectual elite, fewer than 1 out of 10 do. Tyson mentions a headline from the journal Nature that screamed, 93% of elite scientists reject God. But he flips the script on us. As atheists, we often cheer that 93%, looking at it as a victory. Tyson asks a more uncomfortable question. What is going on with the 7%? This is a brilliant point for us to reflect on. These are people who understand the mechanics of the universe better than almost anyone alive. They know about evolution, the Big Bang, quantum mechanics, and yet 7% of them still pray to a personal God. Tyson challenges the atheist community here. He says, you're beating the public over the head, but if you can't convert that 7%, you've got no hope in the general public. From my perspective, this highlights the emotional resilience of indoctrination. Intelligence is not a shield against emotional needs. Even a genius can be afraid of death. Even a genius can crave a cosmic parent figure. It shows that religion isn't just an information deficit problem. It's a psychological one. But, and this is key, if philosophers are surveyed, people who are trained in logic and argumentation, the number is essentially 0, excluding theologians. This suggests that while scientists might compartmentalize their faith, those who study logic for a living find the concept of God utterly indefensible.
There's a case in New Jersey where a middle school kid was lectured to by the history teacher in a public school, and the history teacher said, if you don't accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, you are going to hell. There's a little Muslim girl there, said you are already damned to hell. First point. Second, that Noah had dinosaurs on his ark. Third point he made is that Big Bang and evolution are just theories and you can take them or leave them. So, I don't, like I said, I don't get into these. I just don't. We got people who do this. We've got the 4 horsemen. We got our boy here who's coming up after. We got people who fight this stuff. I'm not one of those, really. I'm doing this because, like, I know you're all, this is the bone I'm throwing you, but I don't do this. So, but then I thought about it and I said, I have an op-ed, a letter to the editor on this that I can write. And I left out the part about Jesus. I left that out. Because if that's how he feels, he wants you to be Christian, that's okay, fine. I left that out. I went to the rest of what he said. And this was my letter, as it appeared in the New York Times. People cited violation of the First Amendment when a New Jersey, that's a separation of church and state, essentially. New Jersey school teacher asserted that evolution and the Big Bang are not scientific and that Noah's Ark carried dinosaurs. The case is not about the need to separate church and state. It's about the need to separate ignorant, scientifically illiterate people from the ranks of teachers. That's the problem. If he wants to believe Jesus is a savior, that's not synonymous with being scientifically illiterate, because 40% of American scientists pray to a personal God. What is identical with being scientifically literate is that if Noah was a human being, he did not have dinosaurs on his ark, because humans and dinosaurs did not coexist, all right?
Tyson moves from statistics to the real-world application of these ideas, specifically in our schools. He recounts a story from New Jersey where a history teacher told a class, including a Muslim student, that they were going to hell if they didn't accept Jesus. This teacher also claimed Noah had dinosaurs on the ark. This is where the rubber meets the road. This isn't just an academic debate. This is about the quality of education our children receive. Tyson wrote a letter to the New York Times about this, and his argument is surgical. He says the problem isn't just the separation of church and state. The problem is the need to separate ignorant, scientifically illiterate people from the ranks of teachers. This distinction is vital. As an atheist, I don't care if my doctor believes in Jesus. I care if my doctor believes that prayer cures cancer instead of chemotherapy. Tyson points out that you can be a Christian and be scientifically literate, like the 40% of scientists mentioned earlier. But you cannot believe that humans and dinosaurs coexisted on an ark and claim to be scientifically literate. That is empirically false. The danger of religious dogma in schools is not that it offends atheists. It's that it literally teaches children things that are not true. It prepares them for a world that doesn't exist. It cripples their ability to understand biology, geology, and physics. It is an act of intellectual sabotage.
Stuff reach below the equator? Jeez, okay. Yeah, it was. Now the good thing is unlike other predictions, like Jesus will come one day, this had a date, okay? You could test it. This was like easy to test. You just sort of wait around for it, all right? So, now it turns out that May 21st was only the day Jesus was supposed to show up. The actual end of the world is October 21st. So the end of the world is still to come this year. This is directly from the website. So I had to tweet. So this was May 21st. So on May 21st or May 20th, I tweeted this. If Jesus actually arrives May 21st, it'll be easy to convince skeptics. If he doesn't show up, do the faithful become atheists? That was my question. Now, in a Twitter stream, it's a live conversation with complete strangers. Everybody depositing their 140 characters worth of thought. So here this is. There was a huge reaction to that tweet. Now, you would expect that most of my followers, or at least a big fraction of them, would be sort of atheistic. So you'd expect people to say, this guy's an idiot, why are we even spending any time on them? Well, one such person did make such a reply, but not in the way you might think. No, anyone who's read the Bible knows this camping asshole was full of shit from the start. Okay, so what do you do with that? So this is somebody complaining about the prediction of Jesus coming because he says this other guy doesn't know jack about the Bible, but this guy does. And went on, there are other places where people quoted that one can't know when Jesus comes. So the fact that this guy's saying he knows means he doesn't read the Bible. So this is what's out there. People who are ready.
We take a brief detour into the comedy of religious extremism. Tyson recalls Harold Camping, the radio preacher who predicted the world would end on May 21st, 2011. When the world didn't end, the goalposts moved to October. This is a classic pattern in cults and religious groups. When prophecy fails, faith rarely breaks. It rationalizes. But Tyson highlights a specific interaction he had on Twitter. He asked, "If Jesus doesn't show up, do the faithful become atheists?" The response he got wasn't just anger, it was sectarian anger. A believer replied calling Camping an asshole who doesn't know the Bible because no one knows the hour. This is the immune system of religion at work. When one religious claim is proven objectively false, the world did not end. Other believers don't question the premise of the religion. They just attack the heretic. They say, he was doing it wrong. It protects the virus of faith by sacrificing the infected limb. It's a defense mechanism that prevents them from seeing the obvious. Maybe the entire book is just mythology.
To vociferously argue about who knows the Bible the least. September 11th, 2001, we just had our 10th anniversary of that. I happen to live 3.5 blocks from what became known as Ground Zero. This image was taken outside my dining room window. The North Tower is on fire. These are 110-story buildings, the World Trade Center towers. This image is the instant the South Tower was hit. It was hit from the left. You could not see the entry point because we're blocked by this other black building. It's a hotel, a 50-story hotel, which is just kind of in the foreground. You see part of the South Tower punching out. This is before the jet fuel had ignited. And when you ignite jet fuel, you set a deflagration wave, not a bomb wave. It's a different kind of wave. It's not accompanied by a shock. This is a split second after that. The fuel has ignited, creating more pressure, and within a split second of that, the entire South Tower was engulfed. And this is fragments of plane and bodies and office coming out the other side. Now, why am I dragging you through this? 62 minutes later, both buildings had collapsed. And there was blue sky where there was once these buildings. This is directly outside of my apartment building, and the emergency vehicles had come. This is the pulverized World Trade Center dust that had settled several inches of it. I say this because shortly after this gentleman got up, President of the United States, George W. Bush. This is actually my photo of him. I was in that room at that time when he spoke. See the medals there on the table? I was on a committee to tell him who to give those medals to the Presidential Medal of Science. And so he actually gave them to everyone we told him to give them to, except he didn't read their citations. He's smart enough to know not to pronounce any of the science words that were in the citation. So he put the medal around the neck, somebody else read the citations. Shortly after September 11th, he gets up, I don't remember where he gave the speech, and he says, in an attempt to distinguish we from they, he says, our God is the God who named the stars. This is before I was on his Rolodex. You know, I could have saved him from himself, okay? It's a loose quote from Genesis that says God named all the stars in the sky, okay? First of all, it's the same God, so he's got that wrong. But Allah, God of Islam, and God of the Jewish God, it's the same God. They call them different names, but it's the same book delivering you the same God. Apart from him getting that wrong, he says, our God is the God who named the stars. What he just didn't know, 2/3 of all stars in the night sky have Arabic names. 2/3 of all stars that have names these are all the Arabic star names. All of these. I don't think this is the point he wanted to make. I just think he figured that out. Like I said, it was before I was on his Rolodex. And so you say, well, how does this happen? How do you get a culture where stars in the night sky are named by them? What was going on? How did that happen? And you have to go back 1,000 years, and you get to Islam in what's the gold.
Now we arrive at the emotional core of Tyson's presentation. He recalls the aftermath of 9/11. He was there. He saw the towers fall. He saw the dust. In the wake of that tragedy, President George W. Bush gave a speech to rally the nation. He said, to distinguish us from the terrorists, our God is the God who named the stars. Tyson, ever the astrophysicist, points out the factual error here. 2/3 of the named stars in the night sky have Arabic names. Altair, Aldebaran, Betelgeuse. These aren't English names, they aren't Christian names. They are legacies of the Islamic Golden Age. This isn't just a gotcha moment. It serves as a bridge to the most important argument in this entire video. How did we get a universe where the stars are named by Muslims, but the modern Islamic world is statistically absent from the frontier of scientific discovery?
Period of Islam. In that period, algebra was invented. Algorithm is an Arabic word. All these words, they begin with AL, 10 to 1, it's an Arabic word. Our numerals are Arabic numerals. Did you pause and reflect on why we call them Arabic numerals? We just call them that, right? But somebody did good stuff with these numerals. It was in Baghdad 1,000 years ago where they invented algebra. And there was advances in mathematics, agriculture, engineering, all of these fields. All at a time when Europe was disemboweling heretics. So something changed. 12th century, this gentleman came around, Al-Ghazali, a Muslim scholar, learned. At this point, Islam is maybe just a few hundred years old. People are reading the Quran and interpreting it however they sort of want to and feel like it. There's not a coherence to the practice of Islam until he comes around and codifies the behavior of a good Muslim. In much the same way St. Augustine, in his book Cities of God, codified what it is to be a good Christian. How do you burn the witches? There's a recipe for that. They got to be upside down so the blood does, It's a whole itinerary for how to be a good Muslim. And in his writings contain the assertion that the manipulation of numbers is the work of the devil. 2, actions that you see in nature are the will of Allah. Well, if you drop a stone and it falls, Allah willed that. If that's your explanation, your curiosity stops. You combine everything happening in nature being the will of Allah to the manipulation of numbers being the work of the devil, and the entire enterprise of that golden era collapses. Now, historians, when they look at that era, they say, well, the Mongols came and so historians think of the world in terms of wars and kings. They think less about it philosophically, about intellectual movements or the absence thereof. Islam rose again after this period, didn't have science associated with it. No new inventions in math. You look at the period of Islam in Spain, the period where the great Alhambra was built. There is no attendant science going on there. It's done, it's gone, and it is a cost that exists to this day. There is 1.3 billion Muslims in the world today who are not participants on the frontier of scientific discovery. What's the best measure of this? Just check out the Nobel Prizes. I tallied them, okay?
This section is devastating. Tyson explains that around 800 to 1100 AD, Baghdad was the intellectual center of the world. While Europe was in the Dark Ages, disemboweling heretics, the Islamic world was inventing algebra, developing algorithms, and advancing navigation. They were open to inquiry. Then, in the 12th century, a scholar named Al-Ghazali rose to prominence. He codified Islamic thought. He argued that mathematics was the work of the devil because it could lead to truths that contradicted the Quran. He promoted the idea of occasionalism, that there are no laws of nature, only the will of God. If you drop a rock, it doesn't fall because of gravity. It falls because God willed it to fall at that moment. As Tyson puts it, if that's your explanation, your curiosity stops. If everything is simply God's will, there is no reason to investigate the mechanism. You don't need physics, you need theology. And just like that, the Islamic Golden Age collapsed. This is the smoking gun for the atheist argument. Religion is not just a benign personal comfort. When it becomes the dominant framework for understanding reality, it kills progress. It stops the questions. It satisfied the mind with a non-answer. The consequences of this theological shift are still felt today, 900 years later.
How many Jews have won the Nobel Prize? In the sciences, here they go. 25% of all Nobel Prizes in the sciences are won by Jews. How many Jews in the world? About 15 million, tops? 15 million? How many Muslims in the world? 1.3 billion, which is huger, way huger than 15 million. How many Muslims have won the Nobel Prize in the sciences? 2.5. 2. I can't bring myself to call economics a science. I'm sorry. I just can't. I've tried. I've really tried. I'm sorry. That's how many. And the physics one was a Pakistani physicist, not a Middle Eastern physicist. So, Jews have 50 times the number of Nobel Prizes. They're 1/80th of the population of the Muslims. Has 4,000 times the impact. I lose sleep every night wondering how many secrets of the universe lay undiscovered because 1/6th of the population of the world is not a participant on the exploration frontier. What thoughts have gone?
Tyson backs this up with a brutal statistic. He compares Nobel Prizes in the sciences between the Jewish community and the Muslim community. Jews, 15 million population globally. 25% of all Nobel Prizes in science. Muslims, 1.3 billion population globally. 2 Nobel Prizes in science. He notes that the Jewish community has 1/800th the population of the Muslim community, but 4,000 times the scientific impact in terms of Nobels. Tyson's reaction to this isn't triumph, it's sorrow. He says, I lose sleep every night wondering how many secrets of the universe lay undiscovered because 1/6 of the population of the world is not a participant on the exploration frontier. This is the humanist tragedy of religion. It's not just about who is right or wrong about the afterlife. It's about the wasted potential of human minds. How many Einsteins were born in strict theocracies but were told that studying the physical world was devil's work? How many cures for diseases were never found because the brilliance that could have found them was diverted into memorizing scripture? Dogma is an opportunity cost. And the cost is incalculable. This is a phenomenon we see globally, including in the US. Religion becomes a cheap suit that politicians wear to signal virtue, while their actions scream the opposite. And the voters? Because they are trained to respect religious authority, they forgive the corruption. They say, man can fool us, but he can't fool God, or leave it to God. This is a recipe for civic apathy. If you believe a deity is in control, you take less responsibility for your government. You tolerate incompetence because you believe there is a divine plan. Nash calls it stupidity, and frankly, it's hard to disagree. It is a surrender of civic agency to a supernatural fantasy. We don't need to destroy religion by force, we just need to support education. As Tyson showed in the beginning, the more you learn, the more you question, the less room there is for a God of the gaps. The history of the last 1,000 years teaches us a clear lesson. Societies that value questions over answers, evidence over authority, and curiosity over dogma are the ones that advance the human condition. Societies that prioritize the will of God over the laws of physics stagnate. The stars were named by a culture that embraced science. That culture then turned its back on science in favor of theology, and the naming stopped. Let that be a warning to us all. We are not immune. The Dark Ages are only ever one generation of ignorance away. Thank you for listening. If you want to help push back against the tide of ignorance, support scientific literacy, support secular education, and most importantly, never stop asking questions,